Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. I went through some kind of deconstruction associated with my own podcasting, and part of that was actually going back and listening to podcasts that I left behind probably at least 7 years ago. I talk occasionally associated with a wargaming podcast that I'd been involved with for about 6 months. I did a slightly negative review on a game. In fact, really, to give some background to this was a game of the US military versus insurgents. And I commented that the insurgent rules just were clearly not written like anyone ever played insurgents. Like everyone just played the US military and then they pretended that the insurgents existed. Had almost a Jarhead, I think, is the movie, where, the enemy is never actually really there. The whole thing is just some kind of psychology thing. I don't know. Anyway, it was that kind of game. Didn't appeal to me. Gave it a relatively negative review. And after I'd given it the negative review, I was then attacked very heavily by one of the sponsors of the podcast who said that, I don't know, I don't think he'd used the term hatchet job, but that was basically his rationale that, I was someone who needed to apologize for this review because it was so underhanded and untoward that I would pollute this podcast with such a review. Well, I thought of this whole thing as just being completely ridiculous. In fact, historically, when these things have happened with podcasts that I've been involved with, and periodically they happen in that light, I distance myself from the podcasts, and I distance myself from this podcast. So after, I don't know, I must have listened to half an episode, maybe 4 years ago, I went back and tried to listen to this podcast again. It's still going, actually. I mean, the guy credits my involvement for him restarting the podcast and continuing on to this day. So I must have had some impact on the guy. But what struck me through this that was more curious was he had a co-host on the recording, and the co-host levels were virtually, you couldn't hear him. Like, it was just like a faint whisper. And I thought to myself, you need a critical ear when you produce podcasts. You need to go back and work on them again. And yes, my time was probably better spent elsewhere. This clearly wasn't the podcast for me. I went on, somewhat justified in my decision. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.